Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Upon Further Review. And today we are here to talk about the big freeze that got laid over Texas this past week. For those who do not know, Mike and I are both based here in North Texas, and we definitely both went through power outages as the state got hit with one of the worst and coldest winter storms in our lifetimes. I think some areas, including DFW International Airport, hit its lowest recorded temperature. I know Dallas had the second lowest recorded temperature ever recorded. I think it hit like -1 degree or something like that. And for those who've never been in the South or Texas specifically, we're not used to these temperatures. And what that means is our infrastructure is not used to not prepared for these temperatures. All of these things combined with the fact that Texas has its own power grid separate for the rest of the country. The East Coast has what's called the East Interconnection, and the West Coast has the West Interconnection. And then there's the Texas power grid. Almost all of Texas is on its own grid. There are parts up in the Panhandle and way out to the west, such as El Paso, that are not on this power grid. That being said, the cold temperatures impacting the Texas power grid resulted in frozen turbines, frozen wind turbines, and the failure of even traditional power generation methods such as coal and natural gas because the pipes and equipment were not winterized. Normally, these things would be called for by federal regulation, but because the Texas power grid does not cross state lines, it is regulated entirely by ERCOT, the Energy Reliability Council of Texas. And we got exposed for it this week, Mike. I don't know about you, me personally. I had no. For the first biggest thing is I had no idea. You know, I've been here in Texas for a little under 3 years now. I had no idea that we were going to lose our power because of the cold. I think they did a pretty poor job of getting that information out there, getting people prepared for it. I know I absolutely was not. I had no idea this was coming until the power went out on Sunday night, which I sadly was right around the time that we were heading to bed. It was the middle of the night. Really, I guess you could say it was Monday morning. It was past midnight on Sunday. Right as we were getting ready to head to bed, boom, power outage. And I remember telling my wife, I thought that somebody must have slid into a transformer or something. I had no idea that there were planned outages. And these outages were supposed to last between 15 minutes to an hour in order to reduce the energy demand on the system because they had reduced output from their electricity generation. They had to reduce the demand so that the entire energy grid did not collapse. So this was actually a planned thing by ERCOT. They sent out notices to all the power providers to cut off power to specific neighborhoods. These were supposed to have been done equitably across the state. I can imagine that probably did not happen. Some people got lucky if you live near a hospital, near power generation equipment, power plants, if you live near, any first responder or emergency type facilities, you may have been very lucky and never lost power. I know of at least one friend who never lost power throughout this entire thing. When we lost power, we had our house, set to a regular temperature of about 73 degrees. We lost power the first time for about 6 to 7 hours when this was only supposed to last for an hour. By the end of that time, I happen to have one of those little laser IR thermometers, Mike. The inside of our house had fallen all the way down to about 60 degrees the first time. And then the power kicked back on. Of course, we cranked the heat back up and we started figuring out exactly what was going on. To make matters worse, the power to cell towers had been lost. So while you can make phone calls, I couldn't even get data. So I couldn't even get on the internet and see what the heck was going on out here. And that cycle really continued for us clean into Wednesday, where we went huge gaps without power. It was never just an hour or two. It was always at least 4 to 5. And the biggest was 7 hours, 7 to 8 hour gaps of no power. And the more that happened as time went on, we got to the point where inside our house was about 50 degrees. And we, took all the precautions we could. We fired up our fireplace, which I must say is not a very strong one. It's a pretty weak gas fireplace, but it's better than nothing. And we got upstairs into our naturally warmest room. We put blankets over the windows and we put all our, while wearing multiple layers of clothes and blankets, did everything we could to still be in a bed that was about, 60 degrees. And while the entire house is rapidly dropping in temperature. So that was definitely a heck of an experience. And for me, I use a CPAP machine when I sleep. So that was just another added annoyance. How about you, Mike? How was your experience going through this entire freeze?
I would say for me, it was okay. I mean, I consider myself lucky. Out of all the inconveniences and the cold temperatures, it didn't bother me as much as some folks. But that's because my power did cycle back on every now and then. And it allowed I would say the average temperature of the house was about 60 degrees for majority of the time. My power was out for those probably 3 to 4 days. But I fully acknowledge that there are people who had no power the entire time. A lot of times people see, and I got reached out by a ton of people on Instagram and Facebook and call and texting me asking if everything's okay once they finally seen a lot of the pictures. Those pictures, a lot of them you see are particularly people who had no power the entire time. You had people, literally dying in their houses, freezing to death in their houses because they had no power. You had people dying in their garages because they went in their cars for heat since they had no power for an extended period of time, and they didn't realize that they needed to open their garage door. Or some people don't know that you can open your garage door when the power's out. There's a fail safe on it. It's a little string you pull down and you can lift manually. But no, these people obviously didn't know that and died and passed away in their cars and their vehicles due to carbon monoxide poisoning. So this is something that nobody would prepare for. I think the lack of preparation is damn near criminal. People lost their lives. A lot of people lost their lives. And they're probably going to still be trying to figure out in these last several days how many deaths were directly attributed to everything that happened. I saw a report that ERCOT had sent out that they were ready for the storm and that they would be good to go 3 to 4 days before the cold weather and the storm hit. And you would think that them knowing the storm was coming, knowing that these temperatures are going to be absolutely freezing, would winterize the critical portions of the grid. They said, I remember seeing that, reading an article that had stated, they said the grid was merely minutes to seconds away from critical failure, where parts of the grid would literally catch on fire, machines would catch on fire, things would literally break permanently and would take days, if not weeks, to get it all back up online. That's how close this came to an even bigger disaster. It's very frightening to think that, that in 2021, we're not ready and prepared for this. I mean, 2021 has already been a crazy year to start. Everybody thought 2020 was crazy. 2021 said, "Hold my beer." So I think what we're seeing is this: we're nowhere, and this is something that's been a common theme. Infrastructure in the United States overall, and when I mean infrastructure, I mean bridges, roads, telecommunications, electricity. All types of infrastructure, things you don't think about when you flip on your light switch. All the work is behind the scene is not prepared. It's not prepared from several means of cyber attack. It's not prepared because it's aging and it's getting old. It's not prepared because we don't have backups and spares that we need to. A lot of these parts are built to order. And so if something fails, we have to actually order a new one, have it built and shipped over here. So I think this is pulling back the covers of a larger problem. Texas in on itself, Texas is going to be Texas. Pretty hard-headed, when it comes to not wanting the federal government in their business. They paid the price for this. They were still hooked up to the grid. This would not have been nowhere near as catastrophic as it was. It's concerning to see that the first knee-jerk reaction of some of our politics, and we'll get into suntan Ted Cruz a little bit later, but the first knee-jerk reaction from our Governor Abbott, was to say that the failure was due to renewable energy sources, and then somehow blame AOC and the Green New Deal, which haven't even happened yet. So how is AOC going to come down from the Northeast, somehow set up set up all the renewable energy making capabilities of the electric grid to fail from back in her home, say up in the Northeast? And it's like she's the boogeyman for them. And they took this as an opportunity to blame renewable energy, where in fact, the turbines that did freeze, they do operate in cold weather in other parts of the U.S. So it's not that it's not reliable in the wintertime. It's just that they didn't winterize it. And it only accounts for, I think in this time of year, they only account for less than 10% of the electricity generated anyway. You had, like you mentioned before, natural gas, nuclear, and coal systems that were failing because of the extreme cold temperatures and because they weren't winterized. This doesn't have anything to do with renewable energy. This doesn't have anything to do with the Green New Deal, as they've been trying to use that as a scapegoat somehow for some. I don't understand why. What this has to do is a lack of preparation, a lack of oversight, and kind of a referendum on, why some of these federal regulations are put into place is to prevent things like this. Don't get me wrong, there are federal regulations that need to be overhauled. I think there's always room for continuous improvement. My background as an engineer always says that there's room for continuous improvement. Just because something's working now or worked in the past doesn't mean it can't be improved upon in the future. But what Texas said is we don't want to subscribe to any of that. We're fine being our own grid so we can do things our own way. And this is something that kind of came back to bite them in the butt. And it's a shame because so many people, it's not even just the loss of life too, which is catastrophic, but also the irreparable damage to property. You're seeing houses that are frozen over because pipes burst and the water inside froze. I've had coworkers who had several inches of water sitting in their house because their pipes burst. This is something that's going to take months to clean up and get correct. This is going to be something that is going to cost billions of dollars to fix and insurance claims. And that's something that, this is something that could have been prevented. All that needed to happen was for the system to be winterized. But since we're in this, since Texas wanted to not have all these heavy regulations to spur on business growth, and all these businesses are trying to, for people who don't know, usually you choose from one provider, whoever your provider is in your area, when you're in most other places in the country. And Texas is like a open market, and you go to the marketplace and you pick your energy provider from a list of 50, 60, I don't know how many energy providers there are. And they all have their different incentives and programs they run. It's almost like, it's like picking a cell phone plan. You pick out which stuff works for you. You can put in terms of a contract and all this type of stuff. And these energy providers are constantly trying to undercut each other. So they do whatever they can to save money. And to me, this comes to the expense of the grid and expense of reliability, because they're just trying to undercut their competitors' prices to get more grow their customer base. And that's where you would think the government will come involved and saying, hey, that's all good. I know everybody's trying to make a buck, but there has to be some regulations. There has to be some things put in place to ensure that our power supply is not compromised. If we had had a total loss, we're talking about hospitals going down. We're talking about emergency services going down. We were seconds to minutes away from that happening. And that's unconscionable in 2021.
If that would have happened, we're talking millions dead statewide. And for those, it's interesting. Mike and I are from the Washington, D.C. area, Maryland area. So we're familiar with coal. And for a lot of people who are confused, because for years you see memes of how, just a quarter inch will shut down everything. It's not a matter of the cold and the weather per se. It's how prepared is your area for it. In the Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, and anywhere north where it snows and you have regular winters with extreme cold and snow, you're prepared for it. You have snow plows. You have methods of treating your streets. Your pipes are wrapped and protected against the winter. My home, back home, you have a water shutoff inside the house that you can access. Out here in Texas, they're not even accessible inside the house. There's somewhere, depending on what neighborhood you live in. I know ours, I had to just find out, it's like out on the curb, like one of those little ports, those little plastic covers in your lawn, and you got to have a special tool to even get to it to shut it off. It's something designed for only the water company to be able to do. Texas infrastructure is not prepared in any capacity for the cold that we experience. We were below freezing temperatures as of last Thursday before this entire event began. So coming into Sunday, they had multiple days of sub-zero temperatures. And then Sunday night to Monday morning is when things really went off, because you had temperatures in the teens for sustained periods of time. I think the lowest temperature I saw was 1 degree here in Texas. And that those temperatures are so far below the pale. Again, we're talking about all-time historical events. That being said, you hit the nail on the head. These things were preventable. They could have saw what was coming and prepared for it in advance. They didn't. And they could have just simply been prepared long term. What I'm hoping is that this is a learning lesson for them to get their act together. Because even if power didn't fail, the infrastructure of buildings and things around Texas, you still saw burst pipes. You still saw impassable roads. They don't have snowplows here, Mike. They can't treat the roads. In fact, out west we have what's known as those bots dots. Those things that are like glued onto the ground, Mike, those are reflectable dots that create the lines. They're not just painted on. You can't even plow over some of those. You'll rip them all clean off. Then there'll be a hindrance for plows. We're in a situation where I told somebody it's actually a stunning arrogance in the design. It's everything is built so that never in a million years will you see freezing temperatures that long. Normally, a cold day or a cold week in the winter for the past 2 years have been here has been, oh man, the temperature's at 34 degrees, somewhere in the high 30s, 40s. Wow, it actually dipped to 30. We actually went below freezing, and that might do that for just a moment in the night. But we had over a week of sub freezing temperatures, averaging in the teens and single digits in the middle of the night. Nothing about our infrastructure can handle that. Pipes exposed with minimal insulation on the exteriors of homes bursting and freezing in a lot of neighborhoods. All depends on how it's built and all depends on how it's laid out. But we are people who are familiar with this, but the infrastructure is not, and people are not. There are people who had to heat their homes for the first time. You touched on it, the sad loss of life. I think the death toll is at 49, last article I checked. And the thing that really pissed me off when I finally got power and had a chance to take a look at the articles and see was to see our governor and see people who, let no tragedy go unwasted when it comes to politics. Immediately assaulting the New Green Deal, for those who don't know, that's an idea that has been proposed by progressive politicians. It's just an idea. It's not even a piece of legislation. It's never been passed. It's never come close. And Texas is this weird beast where we, on one hand, we know about the Republicans here and its connection to oil and fossil fuels, yet Texas leads all states in renewable energy. They did that on their own. They would make, and from some of the comments you saw, it would lead you to believe that, AOC snuck down here years ago and somehow managed to sneak wind turbines into our own system. Texas did that on its own. And instead of embracing that and admitting their failures, admitting their shortcomings, they could have played up the fact that this was an all-historic event that they were unprepared for. It still would have been their failure, but they could have talked about that. They made up lies, political lies for political gain. And after getting called out on it, I know the governor of Texas walked it back. But why do you have to get called out on that? We need better leadership. And speaking of leadership, my goodness, Mike, we have our Texas Senator, Ted Cruz, who coordinated with Houston Police and Houston Airport to flee not only the state but the entire country, to head down to Mexico, where it's nice, warm, and it's a Cancun at that, and we can hit the Ritz-Carlton and live in the lap of luxury while Texans were suffering and dying. Then once he got called out for it, changed his flight, because he was originally scheduled to return on Saturday when all this was supposed to be over with. Changed his flight to come back earlier only because he was shamed into it, Mike. And the worst part about it, I'm seeing people, well, what's Ted Cruz supposed to do? What can he do if he's here and this, that, and the third? Well, like her politics or not, AOC not only raised over $4 million in fundraising for Texas, but she actually showed up. She showed up in Houston, Mike, and she showed up to work at food banks to help out the people and Texans in need. That is leadership by example. Like her politics or not, I don't care if you're red, blue, or orange. That is leadership. And that's what should have been expected of the senator representing the great state of Texas. But the reality is we are so blinded by partisan politics, we can't see it. We will defend, there are people out there who will defend their good old red politics and politicians, no matter how heinous they behave or act, no matter how cowardly they behave or act. I can't imagine Ted Cruz living down this politically in the future. Beto
And he
O'Rourke
lied
came
about
out.
it. Yeah,
Yep,
he lied about it too.
lied
Remember?
about it. Like, this man lied about it.
I'm trying
Instead
to
of
help.
just
I'm trying to be a good father, I think he said.
he threw his kids under the bus. My goodness. We're lucky the weather wasn't good enough for the launch pads to be open, Mike. I think he might have tried to escape the planet. I've never seen such flagrant cowardice from Ted Cruz, and I don't care if that goes all the way back to the fact that he allowed the past president to call his wife ugly, to attack his entire family. So he allude to the fact that his dad killed the JFK, all sorts of stuff. And you know what he did in response? He absolutely bent the knee and licked boots. That's what he did as a response to that. And now here again, here he is, cowardly trying to sneak away from the entire state during an absolute natural disaster, unlike he hasn't seen in his lifetime. And instead of helping Texans, instead of doing some work on the ground, this man is trying to flee to the lap of luxury in Cancun. It's disgusting, Mike.
Hey, I thought they were trying to stop all that immigration and migration between Mexico and the United States, and there he goes. Mexico should have put up a wall to keep him out. It's totally disgusting what Senator Cruz did. He's a scumbag. He's scum. He, like you said, highlight for all the reasons you said before. He has no backbone. He has no spine. I don't even think he bent the knee to Trump. He got on both knees and did what he had to do to stay alive and politically relevant. To me, that type of leadership exists and continues to get voted into office is a referendum on just politics in general. It's very bad to see that. It was refreshing to see AOC to come down here in person, not only to raise money, but actually put boots on the ground to actually do something. She didn't have to. This isn't her. This isn't her state that she's representing. But she did it because it was the right thing to do. She did it because she genuinely wanted to help. I think other politicians could take a cue from that and saying that I'm supposed to be representing the people, my constituencies, for Ted Cruz's whole state of Texas. You should be here. You should be trying to figure out ways to help. Maybe even if you were still back in DC, I know they're on recess, but going up there, trying to figure out ways, working with President Biden to try to expedite federal funds and any other kind of, maybe they need to activate the National Guard to help move people from places because they open warming centers here to help move people who didn't have transportation, to warming centers. Stuff could have been done that you could have been an advocate for, coordinating and help campaigning for in Washington for federal funds to help the constituents of your state. But, he wanted to be a good dad, and he just was trying to fly his daughters to Cancun. First of all, that sounds like such a pompous asshole thing to do. While millions of people in my state are suffering, my daughter asked, can they take a quick trip to Mexico because school was out, because of the freezing temperatures. I said, sure, and why not? I'll tag along too. And just being a good dad, I'll go there and I'll stay a few days too. And he lied about it. He tried to say that he was just flying his daughter there and immediately coming back. But he knew the receipts would come out and people would be able to pull the receipts of how long he was going to stay and the duration of his stay and look at his flights coming in and coming out. And they knew that they were going to be able to surmise that he had no intentions of coming directly back and he was going to stay there for several days. Like I say, he's just scum. How you say how he survives? He'll survive the same way he's survived all the time. He'll get on both knees and please whoever needs to be pleased in order for him to hold on to his power. But it's just a sad, sad thing to see when so many people were suffering. So many people, I just looking at videos of people just crying and devastated, and people who are just so cold. I remember I saw a video of this guy, he's just wrapped up in I don't know how many layers, and he's in his bathroom with the door closed and towels around the door, and is running his hot shower and just trying to survive off the steam to stay warm. And here he is trying to get a Mai Tai on the beach. It's very disgusting. Like I said, he's scum to me. I thought he was scum before this, but this just reaffirms my previous suspicion. But we'll see. This is something that could have been totally prevented. This is something that hopefully they'll learn moving forward, that maybe they should reconnect with the broader grid. Because put it this way, the entire all the grids, both grids, East and West Coast, and Texas should be all under national security preview anyway. Because if the electrical grid goes down, we're all screwed. We're talking about. I actually was in a Facebook. I was on My wife showed me a Facebook post of somebody trying to be, after the government had made the thing about renewable energies being sources being the cause of this. Somebody was smug and saying, see all these people who are getting solar panels and all this stuff. Without gas, electricity is pointless. And I wanted to comment under her thing. Do you realize that the gas you get from the gas pumps are ran off electricity? So if the electricity bill was to truly go down, those would go down as well, and your gas would be useless as well. You wouldn't be able to get it out the pumps. So it goes to show you that, to me, this is actually the electric grid is from a national standpoint, critical infrastructure that needs to be regulated and needs to be actually updated because it's severely behind. They have aging infrastructure that needs to be addressed, and that's something that needs to have the same level of care that we give to our military, to be honest, because if the grid goes down, we're screwed. I mean, just imagine the short little bit of time you had without power and communications, and you were at least still able to make cell phone calls. If the entire grid were to truly collapse, you wouldn't be able to make cell phone calls. Everybody, chaos will ensue. You can't buy, you can't sell, you can't go nowhere, nothing works. I mean, you have to protect this most critical piece of infrastructure in American society, and it wasn't done. It's shameful that we had to see that, but I hope this is a wake-up call, not just to Texas, but to all of Congress, that infrastructure spending is a big issue. It needs to be addressed. We need more sources of renewable energy. We need to invest in more houses, be able to become energy dependent. I mean, I can only imagine if every house, I thought about putting solar on my house, but I was going to get solar on my house. I was going to get the Tesla Power wall. That way my house would be self-sustaining. That means that the solar energy it generates would, all the extra energy would go into the power wall, and those would run my house at night when the sun comes back up. It will recharge my batteries and both still run my house. So you'll be energy independent. Well, too bad that my electric company, CoServe, pretty much made it so that's possibly in part impossible without essentially paying them free money. The way they set it up is any extra energy you produce that goes over the capacity you need at the time and what can go into your batteries, you have to give them for free. And they're not going to pay you back. If back in Maryland, I believe Pepco and BG&E, any extra energy you make comes back as a credit to you. Because you're supplying the grid with energy. Here with CoServe, that's not the case. They just take it and say thank you. So they actually have to build your system to less efficient than what you need. What we need to be doing is putting more emphasis on figuring out how we can get more homes, if not reducing the load that these homes have on the grid, but if not making them self-sufficient, they're not even needing the grid. And if anything, powering the grid with the extra surplus energy they have. I think this kind of calls into focus a broader discussion of climate change. I think people, when they say climate change, they think of just, global warming, the earth is getting warm. But climate change truly indicates that you're going to have more aggressive swings in temperature, more aggressive storm events, more aggressive wildfires. Everything will be more intense. It doesn't mean that it's just going to be hotter outside, so thus it'll never be colder. No, that means that when it does get cold, it's going to get really cold. It's going to get colder in places that it shouldn't get. This is something that, we're seeing the symptoms of right now. And I think this is something that hopefully you'll see with all the weather patterns that happened last year. I believe last year was the most named hurricanes on record, right? This is something that, we need to pay attention to. And this is something that you're seeing Bill Gates, pounding the table on, saying, look, we only have a finite amount of time. I believe he said we have until 2050 to get, in his estimations, to get carbon neutral, which means that we no longer have a carbon footprint because we're using so many alternative means of energy and fueling and manufacturing that we don't get to that point. We can see millions and millions of people on Earth die every year because of repercussions of climate change. You'll see whole swaths of the Earth that used to be able to farm, people used to be able to live, but be no longer livable. So we're kind of at the precipice of this now. I'm hopefully this is something that, both sides of the aisle, I'm hoping Democratic and Republicans can go say, hey, this is something that's an issue. It blows my mind that you still have a lot of staunch right-wing conservatives who say that climate change isn't even a thing, despite all the scientific proof proving that it is. They still have their doubters. This is something that should be not just a American thing, but a worldwide thing that we all need to do and work in concert together to make sure that this planet stays inhabitable, if not for us, for our children. So I'm hoping that this may spur some more conversations when people try to figure out what happened and they realize that how fragile our grid is and how much we need to improve in the energy sector, and some meaningful change can come out of it.
As we wrap up here today, the infrastructure of America is aging and crumbling, and it needs to be modernized and updated for a new millennium and a greener future. We have so many options available to us. I think, personally, I think we need to actually investigate modern advances in nuclear energy, because many of the nuclear incidents in the past were based on, plants built in the 50s and 60s and things of that nature, because nuclear energy can provide tons of clean, renewable energy. We talk about infrastructure. It goes not just power. We can make fun of Texas. We can kick Texas for their failures, but there are parts of the country. I know California had rolling blackouts last year because of climate change. It was hotter in a heat wave than they were ever expecting, and their aging infrastructure resulted in power failures. And that's happening really across the country. We know back home, in Maryland, just the right storm can knock out power to many neighborhoods and many areas in Maryland. Just storms, branches going down, still having above ground power and knocking them down, and just kind of playing whack-a-mole, repairing the damages to the grid. And the reality is we're going to have punishing winters, colder than in areas that never expected. This is not going to be the last time. We may very well see it again next winter. We're going to have hotter summers with more punishing temperatures, and that's going to have a devastating impact on the climate. We're going to have powerful storms, all as a result of climate change. Climate change is very much a real thing. If you don't believe it, we had 1 degree here in North Texas in February, mid to late February. Coldest temperatures ever recorded, and then we're going to also see the hottest temperatures ever recorded in the same year, and it's not going to stop. The storms and the hurricanes are not going to stop. And we have to begin taking advantage of our advances in science and technology. There's no reason every home doesn't have some form of solar panels to offset its demand to the main power grid, because you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. It is an issue of national security. If we had total failure of ERCOT's power grid here in Texas, we would see millions dead. And it would have taken weeks, Mike, to restore and fix. They would have to rebuild the grid from scratch, according to some reports. We talk about infrastructure. The bridges of America are crumbling, where we can face the reality of having interstates severed, which would affect the movement and flow of supplies if certain bridges collapse, because they're aging. They're 50, 60 years old. They were built, during the Eisenhower administration. Water, people all know about the issues in Flint, Michigan with lead in the water. There's lead in the water in Pittsburgh. There's lead in the water all across America with aging infrastructure, old lead pipes, and things falling apart. These are the basic needs of people that need to be understood, and action needs to be taken now, both to do it in a greener, more energy efficient way, and to do it in a way that we're not going to poison our kids or grandkids and generations down the line, and that we're not going to continue to exacerbate the it's funny, it's unnatural weather patterns, but it's coming from nature. Nature is responding to the actions of human beings over the past 100 years of industrialization. We have to take action now, and we need to be smart about it, and we cannot fight over partisan politics about it, because we can be green with our energy, and we can take actions that will save money. Energy from the sun is free so long as you have the panels, of course, installed, and that's going to obviously be an upfront cost. But you can save money once you have them over the long run. We can save money so that every time there's a power outage, we don't have to send out armies and make repairs. So we can save money so that the cost of maintaining is not as high once we actually get over the initial cost of replacing, so that people can have stable power and clean water no matter where they are in what's supposed to be the greatest nation on earth, the richest country in the world. We've got to do better. And hopefully we learn from these and we don't continue to bicker and fight when we can be improving, because at the end of the day, people need help. Doesn't matter if it's your district, your state. Americans need help. Our fellow Americans need help from sea to shining sea, and we've got to do a better job. And hopefully, just a little bit of hope that we can one day get to that.